Hey, good evening to you. I just wanted to make a brief video and talk a little bit about format in writing and just refer to Chapter 5 somewhat. If you happen to have the new edition of the book, and there is Chapter 5 on document design, they actually moved this chapter from the previous edition, so it would be one of the earlier chapters if you have the 7th edition. But they talk about document design and consistent design and so on. And one of the key elements that I wanted to point out to you is if you work for a bigger company, so like for example NASA. NASA has a style guide and it's available on the internet. Most companies, like I had a student that worked for Caterpillar, and they have guides as far as for reports, incident reports, accident reports, bids, requests for proposal, all those types of documents. They have them on a template, and you just fill in the information and so on. And also, too, companies often have style guides telling you, how they want you to write, how certain words should look. Because I was in the Navy, and the word "on board" meant that one word meant that someone was on board a naval vessel. So the captain is on board the USS Kitty Hawk, which was a ship that I was on. If you had like "on board" as two words in the military, that meant that you were in agreement with something, and so that was the difference with it. But a style guide, as I mentioned, many companies will have them. Many companies will have templates for employees to follow for different documents. But the style guide will tell you, this is how we want our paragraphs to look. This is when you use headings. This is how we want you to use headings for subheadings. This is how we want you to use visuals in a document, and so on. And if you look in Chapter 5 where they talk about the document design and so on, they do mention right on the bottom of 121 style sheets when you're writing a long document with many documents. With many design elements, it may be difficult to remember how you format it. And so for that reason, they recommend that you follow a style sheet or a style guide. And so they explain it more on page 122 and on to 123. And, and like I said, the majority of places that you work for, they will have guidelines to follow. And if you go, for example, if you go to Penn State University and you're in their engineering school or, agricultural science, they have a style guide for students to follow to make sure that when they write certain types of documents, they look consistent and things like that. And even as far as style, and for most of the papers you write at the college level, you have to use the MLA, the Modern Language Association, like documentation style. In some cases, you'll use the APA, the American Psychological Association documentation style, and that's more for the math, science, and those types of areas, allied health and nursing. But if you look on page 123, they have templates. And templates, as I said, that they are design tools to help you to do different types of documents. And if you happen to be in Word and you're using a Word document, you can click on New, and it'll give you different templates for memos, letters, business letters, and so on. There's all different types of documents. If you have to do an invoice, if you have to do minute meetings, or meetings for a minute, meeting minutes, that type of thing. They give you different examples. But on 124, they talk about grids, and I'll illustrate that point. I mean, whether it's an online document or whether it's a document that's that you're going to give to someone to look at or email, you can spread them out. You can use different numbers of grids, and I had to do a resume assignment a couple years ago when I was at Chatham University, and I originally had about 2 or 3 grids across the page for the document as far as how it was laid out. And then what I eventually did was I made I had Sherry Knoll, who's the coordinator of student placement. I had her look at it, and she said, you know what, let's make this a 4-grid spread and spread it out more across the page and make the margins wider. And it really helped significantly, and it was very, very useful. So that's what that is. As far as white space, you know, the amount of space between paragraphs or between columns or grids and so on. So they talk about that as well. You know, you can see like on paragraph length, paragraph indenting, headings, list on page 128 as far as that goes. Font size, font types on page 130. They get into font style guidelines as far as, you know, how many font types you can use when you do a document. You know, you want to limit that to you know, to most of 2 or 3, but they mention that as far as that goes. But this is interesting on page 134. Consider the tone you want to convey. And now, you know, when you're doing a document, you can convey tone through your font choice because, for example, for wedding invitations, if you use a more formal cursive type of font, that is it gives a different impression. I had a student in class a couple years ago, and she would use like a confetti kind of font. It was sort of like for party invitations and so on, and it created a different tone. Sometimes when I send somebody an email, I'll use Lucinda handwriting, and it's almost like I'm writing a note to them rather than an email, and so that creates a different tone. So I just wanted to mention that to you, that the choice of font that you have makes a big difference. And then on 135 they get into, you know, headings, different things with that nature, and they talk about first level headings, second level, and so on. You just want to make them consistent. And then the other point that they talk about is designing digital documents, and they also get into that. Well, that's on 139 and 140. But if you have the new edition of the book, in chapter 14, there's a whole chapter on web pages and writing for the web, and as far as designing documents that are more web friendly. And they talk about on 538 as far as guidelines for navigation design, you know, making navigation through the document easier, and guidelines for writing web content on pages 542 and 543. And, you know, like I said, later on in the semester you can take a look at that chapter. But it is very, very useful and very user-friendly. So chapter 5 talks about, you know, page design and so on. And chapter 14 gets into more web design. But on page 529, there is also a web planning form. So if you're doing a website or if you're doing some web-oriented content, it gives you some suggestions to follow. But if you're working together with a group of people and you're doing a document, the one thing that I would suggest is if you don't have official style guidelines to follow, then make up some basic ones like they have in Chapter 5, so to make sure that you're consistent with the way that the document is set up. And you have to do that, especially, you know, if you have a whole series of people working on a document, to make sure it's consistent. I'm involved at WCCC with Middle States, which is a 10-year accreditation. We have to do it every 10 years. And I'm involved with another person as a co-chair of Standards 1 and Standards 6. And you have to do, I believe, 12 different standards. And we're looking at issues of ethical practices in education. That's one of our standards. And so what we have to do is we work in this subgroup. We have, you know, about 6 or 7 people in our group, and we gather data and information. But in essence, myself and another person will do the writing and submit what we came up with from our subgroup. So there's going to be 6 of these groups, and they all submit. And then 2 administrators at the college will work on and format the document. And then we're going to have one person to basically do it all and make sure that the document is consistent and well laid out. So that's what I wanted to tell you, though, is the whole idea is for consistency's sake. A couple of years ago, during the summer, I was asked by a textbook company to do a project, and the project that I did was working and updating the content for the website for this Strategies for Successful Writing book that we were using. And so that was interesting, but not only did I have to refresh and update the content and look for new information, which I really used a lot of help from reference librarians, but I also um, was able to make sure that the format, layout, and everything was consistent as far as like with the headings, the subheadings, the verbs that I was using to introduce sections, and so on. And it was a very useful type of exercise. And something else that I did that was very useful to do was I wrote about 4 chapters in an instructor's manual. And if you ever teach, most instructors' manuals are not very good, but this one was excellent. And like I said, I think there was 8 or 10 chapters, and so several people contributed to this. But I did one on like assessing writing, creating a plan for your semester or your term or whatever it was, and so on. So I had to really work on these for a long time. It took about 3 months, but it was good and a good assignment to do. Not a good assignment, a good type of work to do that that we were able to get that completed. But the document had to be consistent. So when I wrote it and when another person wrote it, it had to look similar. So we had to use the word, instead of using semester, we had to use the word term. We had to refer to the book in the same way. And that's basically what it was. But as I said, I really very much enjoyed it. One other thing that I wanted to mention to you is in the summer months, I teach advanced composition. And last summer, or maybe it was the summer before, I had a student that did a paper on headaches. I don't know if it was cluster headaches or migraine headaches or whatnot, but I have students do health or wellness type of documents, research papers. And this one student did a really interesting paper, like I said, it was on cluster headaches or migraine headaches. But the content was good. It was just the format that was hard to follow because oftentimes the paragraphs were like 1 page long. There were no headings or subheadings in the document. Good information, but very few times where they were drawing conclusions in the writing. So it took a good deal of time to read it. As I said, the information was interesting, but it needed a little bit more formatting. And I had another student who did her paper on skin cancer. And she went to a Catholic high school, and she had to wear a skirt. And so she liked to tan because she wanted to look, tanned all year. And she ended up getting skin cancer on her calf. She also had 2 places on her back that were. And so what she did was she actually had photographs from her dermatologist, and she included those in the document and the research paper. And it was nice too because she also was able to do some other things. Like she used headings at the very start of the paper. She had like 8 to 10 things that she was going to cover, and then in the paper she used the headings, and then in each section she had 3 or 4 subheadings. It just made it so much easier to read. And then she also used visuals in the paper. She used some graphs and charts and statistics. She actually put a couple links in for YouTube, and it was just a much more engaging, clearer paper. And even stylistically, at the end of a section with a heading, and she had the subheadings, and she'd have a paragraph or 2 where she would draw conclusions. And it was good information, but it was also more visual. It had more headings, subheadings. The paragraphs were shorter and more digestible, so it was easier to scan, skim, read, and understand, and it pulled you in and drew you in. So that's what I would tell you in technical writing. The format is just as important as the content is. It makes a big difference. I had a student some years back that did written instructions on like doing a vegetable garden, and the first time that she did hers, they were like 6 steps, and these steps were, big long paragraphs each, and she only had 2 or 3 visuals, and so she redid it, and then she broke it down at about 15 steps, and she made about 3 times the number of visuals. Huge difference, and it was, I think she went from about a 73 or 74 her grade was the first time, and then she revised it, and I think she ended up getting a 97 or 98. It was just unbelievably better. And just my last example for you. So I just wanted to use some student examples, but also too with the President of the United States every day gets this document from the CIA called the Presidential Daily Briefing, and it says, the threats to the United States are in Afghanistan, or in the United States, these are some threats from militia groups and so on. And right after September 11th, what the heck did they do? They had the Wall Street Journal had this graphic designer come in and redesign the Presidential Daily Briefing. And so what he did was he used headings, subheadings, used white space, used bulleted list, and then also too, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most dangerous, he would number sections to say these are things that you really need to pay attention to. These are things that are less significant. And so it was very, very useful. But I know after that the CIA redesigned the Presidential Daily Briefing to make it easier to read, skim, scan, and so on. So that's what I would tell you. Format and content go hand in hand, but I can't stress to you enough how important format is, because we've done these good and bad written instructions. And if you look at good written instructions, you can see how important format is. I mean, it does make a big difference, even the amount of white space. So that's what I really wanted to get into, and hopefully this information was helpful. Thank you.